friends. This is the Fat Man GM, of course. Well, this isn't exactly, but what we're coming up on, this would be an intro, I guess, to creating, or the revisitation of my FASA collection for Star Trek, the role-playing game. And this is a game system that's always fascinated me. It really has. The options and available stuff. I mean, if you are a fan of science fiction, especially if you're a fan of Star Trek, the opportunity to play in that universe is very compelling. And there's a lot of ups and downs, insides and outs with it. Lots of material to work from. Very popular, and some issues and or problems with playing in the game system. One of the biggest that we ran into, and I've done a number of videos on it, is how to portray a group of player characters, and having one to be a captain and one being representing the key individual, chief engineer, chief medical officer, so on and so forth. That shoehorns somebody into a role. That means if you have 4 or 5 people playing at the table, somebody must be this character, must fulfill this role. And a lot of players rebel against that. They may openly say, yeah, I agree with it, but at the end of the day, they don't want to be the person who has to be the medical officer, has to be the tactical officer, or so on and so forth. So when you talk about dealing with how to approach this, one of the methods I chose to do was to have the crew be members of the lesser officers. They're going to do the away teams. They're going to handle troubleshooting and things like this. And your senior officers are going to be NPCs. This allows for some ease of continuity in the game, because characters can die. And if the character happens to be the captain of the ship, and that character keeps croaking, there's a problem. One way to get around that, of course, would be to rotate, so the next senior officer becomes captain. So your former chief medical officer now becomes the captain of the ship. Is impossible, but ideally not ideal, because that's not what they do. Can you imagine Bones McCoy as the captain of the Enterprise? There's a reason why he's not in the command structure. His department's separate. Engineering is separate. So you have a command crew. You have the gold shirts. And so when Kirk was off the bridge, it would be Chekhov, or it would be Sulu, often Sulu, although we've more than often seen senior officers. We've seen Uhura, and we've seen Scotty in charge and stuff like that, and I think that was on a case-by-case basis, depending on the severity of the situation, but we still have issues there. Now, if your player characters are representing the lower echelons of the crew, then somebody gets killed or badly wounded, they can be replaced fairly easily, hence the term red shirt. It's a tongue-in-cheek reference from it. Just seemed like every time somebody in a red shirt, a security officer, went to the surface on an away team with Captain Kirk, he didn't come back. At least not come back intact anyway. It just is what it is, right? Another common theme issue when dealing with Star Trek as a role-playing game, especially in the early days, was that dealing with ship combat, well, it's much more fluid to sit there and role-play it out, and you miss out a lot of the heavy nuances of actual combat. And that in part stemmed from my extensive knowledge and use of this particular system here, Starfleet Battles, and you only really have to look at just how detailed your options are in here. I mean, looking back now, I wish I had kept all the covers, because this is actually 5 or 6 different book installments. Each book was about this thick. It came with some maps and some tokens for ships, and then broke things down. And we also have a number of races and things like that in here that never made it to the main canon. The Hydrians, for example, are not. You know, look at the Klingons. I got the Romulans, of course. The Andromedans never made it. The Lyrians never made it. The Hydrian never made it, which is sad. But you know, not everything's going to be catering across. You know, get the backs of them. Yeah. This is Starfleet Battles Commander's Rulebook. And then this is, yeah, there's one of the covers of the other modules that came out. And then here is, the front one's not there, but you can see Volume 2, and then there's a Volume 1, Volume 3. And this is Volume 3 here. So there's, yeah, there's 5. And then there was a number of extra supplements that got popped in there with it. And I've got a couple ship sheet manuals up there that pre-mates. But anyway, we had combat with a large warship is much different than a smaller ship. So if you look at combat in Star Wars, combat between fighters and freighters and things like that, the Millennium Falcon rarely does it just for dramatic effects do they go up against Star Destroyers. Usually it's small ship on small ship, and the big behemoths in the background trying to chase you down, and you get away before it gets to you. In Star Trek, the heavy cruisers battle heavy cruisers. I mean, if you're a crew as a member of a heavy starship, of the Galaxy class, you're going to have to fight a Galaxy class. You're going to have to fight it as a ship against a foe. One way to circumvent that, to get around that, is to have your players operate in a much smaller vessel. Starfleet is full of ships and ship classes, most of which are less than a cruiser. Now, destroyers and are quite common, and so are scout ships, which is the equivalent of patrol ships. And then there's a handful of middle ships, and then between the destroyer and the battleship, the equivalent of the heavy cruiser, you've got middle cruisers, you got light cruisers, and you got frigates. So you have a variety, right? So perhaps it's better for them to be members of a much smaller ship, which creates different set of dynamics and challenges. Traditional of Star Trek, a lot of players come in thinking they're going to be members of the Enterprise, and they're going to work and operate just like you see on the TV show, and that's plausible if that's how you want to run it. I never cared to do that. I tried first couple times, and it just didn't seem to do right. It didn't work well. We had problems, so we switched down. The destroyer was a common choice. 60, 70 man crew, much smaller, and in truth, it gets involved in more things than what you'd think the big ships. You see in the movies, the Enterprise is always in the thick of stuff. Well, that's because it's the flagship. But in truth, most of the patrol duties, most of the investigative duties, most of the commerce and anti-commerce raiders and piracy fighters and things like this are all done with smaller ships. And that makes sense. We're going to Starfleet, if you go by any indication, just going by this 30-year-old FASA version, they had roughly 12,000 capital ships and about another 20,000 auxiliaries. So roughly 32,000 ships were part of Starfleet as of the beginning of the Next Generation, or the era between Captain Kirk and the later movies when we see this transition. So of those, probably 5% were heavy cruisers or heavier because of the costs and the tasks required. For every Enterprise mission, there's going to be 50. All we're doing is cruising the border and keeping an eye on what's going on. We're trying to keep people from adventuring back and forth across the Romulan border, neutral zone, or keeping an eye a watchful eye out for the occasional Klingon raiders coming in from across the Klingon neutral zone. We may be chasing down third-rate pirates, or following up on some minor diplomatic mission, or so on and so forth. And there's plenty of opportunities for adventure in the Star Trek canon and universe as members of a smaller crew. That was another method for helping to make it more of a playable game system. It wasn't necessary for everybody to be a specific character type. You could have a whole collage of people that get picked from the crew in general, and they're junior officers, and that makes sense because the junior officers are going to be tasked to do a lot more of this stuff than the senior officers for a number of reasons, least of which the Federation says that the starship captain is not supposed to go on away missions. There was a reason that kept being mentioned in the early seasons of Next Generation. Riker kept chastising Picard for doing things like that, because you don't put the head guy in who's in charge of everything at risk. It's not because he's a coward, or it's because he's needed on the bridge as the captain of the damn ship, especially a ship the size of the galaxy. Just what it is. Their stuff, not my stuff, right? And we look at all the varieties of things. It's an interesting conundrum. So, hopefully some of this will help, some of it don't. My 2 cents, as always interested in hearing what you guys got to say on the subject. Till next time. Oh, this is the Fat Man saying, oh, wait a minute. I got a thing. I'm going to show you that opening credit one more time. Now, some of you might recognize the theme music as from the Mirror Darkly from Enterprise. And frankly, I would much rather play a Mirror Darkly campaign than a normal Federation campaign, because it seems to be there's a lot more opportunity for some pretty nasty stuff in there. I've always wished that they'd come out with supplements for, and FASA at the time never did, to my knowledge, come out with anything that was geared towards running campaigns in the Mirror Darkly universe, which would be an alternate reality from Federation space, from the Star Trek that everybody knows and loves. But it's appropriate for me, especially just appropriate. Another thing is the opening bit there, this particular piece right here, the Starfleet Technical Manual. That particular book, when I was a kid, my best friend, Richie Gilson, his older brother, had one of those on his shelf. And that is not a role-playing aid. That is not for any role-playing game whatsoever. It is a fan book for the Star Trek universe. And they produced the very first one in the late 70s, and they've updated and upgraded that numerous times over the years. It is the unofficial guidebook for everything Star Trek, more or less, the Federation. Anything you would assume if you were a Starfleet cadet coming out of the academy, that this is something they would hand you as information. There are ship recognition manuals, and I've got one of those versions sitting on a shelf or in a box. I was looking for it the other day and I can't find it, so I'm thinking it's in a storage box. It's at the back of our storage locker, because I've got about a dozen big plastic totes back there full of novels and things, and I think there's still some game books that are stashed in one of them. I'm hoping so anyway. I know there's my collection of newszines and for the RPG network are in there, and a few other. My battle technology magazines are in there for BattleTech, so I'm hoping a number of Stardate magazines, if any of you are familiar with those, are in there. And I'm hoping this is in there too. I always found that to be a very useful tool in the RPG version. And I know there's modern versions of that available, so if you're going to play any of the new Star Trek material, get your hands on a Starfleet Academy guide. You will not regret purchasing it. I'm just pointing out. And so, if you choose to ignore or view some of the things, like the Starfleet General Orders that I'm going to work my way through each one and make my 2 cents worth on. Uh, Not perhaps as nice a video as I could do here, which have the video XSplit stuff that gives me some ability to do a little bit of flash and bang kind of thing. So much less you can do with your cell phone, especially mine. And our money's tied up right now saving for a house, so I'm not going to run out and buy a fancier camera, although I'm really, really, really wanting to have one. I have one here. It has some sound on it, and you can record on a SIM chip, SSID chip or whatever. The downside is that it's a fixed screen, so I can't see what I'm focusing on. If I turn it around towards me, at that point it's blindly, and I have much less control over it. I'm not even sure if it's working because the button's hard to turn. It's meant to be held you looking that way, not the reverse kind of thing. I need one where you can flip the thing around. Those are a couple $100, right? It's not on the list at the moment, at least until I get my credit card paid off. Now, then maybe I'll get me a late Christmas present. Maybe if the wife lets me, but we'll talk about that at a different time. The trying to do good videos is a challenge, and I respect these people that do excellent videos with a thin budget or no budget, and I could see why the ones that are most popular have an editing crew and have very good software and options to them. This is one of the reasons they get so many video hits. If you wonder, one or two of you guys wonder, why can't I get more subscribers? Why can't I get more stuff? Well, you have to hit a niche. You have to hit a chord with people. You have to present a personality that strikes something of interest with them. But you also have to have the right, dumb luck helps, and the right equipment and knowledge, I think. But for most of us, that's not what this is about. We're not in it for the money. We're never going to make money with these things. The fact of the way that YouTube now has it set up, the lion's share of us are never even going to become monetized again. Well, you have to have 4,000 minutes of viewing time in a given year and X amount, 2,000 subscribers before you can even be considered as monetization. And I believe that's a mistake on their part. I don't think they were nickel and diming themselves out. I think they just found an excuse to save a few dollars, which is usually an indication of a corporate mindset and not the original mindset that created the program or the community in general. But that's not what you're here to care about. But like I said, if you can get that Starfleet manual, you won't be disappointed. It's a very nice addition to any Star Trek games play, and gives you some good background information. And as I said, FASA did its level best to follow every bit of Star Trek canon they could get their hands on, whether it was from the writers or from the producers or from Gene Roddenberry himself. That Starfleet manual, Starfleet Academy manual, is not copied, but borrowed from heavily in the creation of the game material. So there you have it. Till next time, game on.